Scribble scribers, scribbity scrappers, you scrumptious subscriber. We're back with another episode. And what is this? Is this Captain's Log Stardate 743769? Something like that. Okay. It's a project. A literal project. I'm projecting my own image onto the screen through a camera and my hand. And who am I doing this for? Well, you, my dear viewer. Scribbity scriber. Alright, I'm doing it for you. What are we going to cover in today's episode? Today's episode, which is sponsored. We got our first sponsor in today's episode, which is coffee. Coffee is sponsoring this episode. I'm drinking coffee, and in this moment, that was precisely the thing that I needed. Yes, I'm a creature with needs, and goods fulfill those needs. I go to the local trading post, to the local trading station, and I traded coffee from a local merchant. At the bazaar, at the local bazaar, I got some coffee there. And now it's brewed up in my cup. Okay. I got coffee flown in from Java or fucking Borneo. It's been roasted in Switzerland, then brought here to whatever country this is, and put in a French press, and then into a mug from IKEA. Get the picture? Global trade, motherfucker. Global trade. Okay. You thought the days of sitting in your woodshed and making yourself a little spoon were still around? Nah. Now you make one simple little process, like making a cup of coffee. You've traveled several continents. You're touching things that have been shipped around and around and around and around and around the world for some reason. Sometimes in a plane, sometimes in a boat. And so this episode is sponsored by coffee. And I'm using coffee as a drug to get myself pepped up, to give you, the scribbler, the perfect cup of morning motivation. Because let's face it, you need this morning motivation, okay? You're the kind of guy that needs to be dragged out of your hazy state. And who better to do it than you yourself? And of course the viewer, the dear viewer, is also welcome to participate in this. So, Self-help. What are we talking about today? Well, I kind of hinted at it in the introduction of the video. Global trade. Okay, we're talking politics, we're talking economic policy, the future. Okay, how are we gonna make the space elevator? Okay, how are we gonna do it? You look at infrastructural development from World War I, and you think to yourself, logical conclusion, space mining, right? But how are you going to get the ore down from space? Space elevator, people say. Oh, it's easy, space elevator. Okay. I was on an important course. I was at a course yesterday. And I was at this talk. And this thinker, this futurist, this prominent figure in the Welsh futurist community, he was talking about the space elevator. Space elevator. Next stop, space. Ding. Then you're there waiting. It's like kind of awkward. Imagine farting in the space elevator. That's not a good look. That's not a good look at all. You get into the space elevator. You hit the button. What floor do you want to get off on? Well, I don't know. The moon. And then you get in there and it's like 2 stories up. And then boom. You rip a big fart in there. And then you're stuck inside of a fucking elevator, smelling your own farts. And it's like, it's an elevator, but still, it's the moon. It takes at least, a good 15 minutes to get up there, I would imagine. So, you're in there smelling your own fart in the tallest elevator on the planet. And there's like elevator music in there. And like there's another person in there. And now they're smelling your farts. And what are you gonna do? You're gonna try to blame your fart on the other person? How are you gonna be able to do that? Other person is like, and you just like hurriedly start pretending as well, like, oh yes, I smell, what the hell was that? I smell it too. You must have farted. No, you. Then they're in there arguing all the way up to the moon. All the way up to the moon, they're just arguing. And yeah, and so that's a little scenario. So we live in a world of resources. All right, we gotta mine resources. But what is a resource? Okay, what is a resource? Okay, can you tell me the definition of a resource? It's something that you want. All right, it's just something you want. Okay, one resource. If you're like me, you work in the acting business. You're an actor. Your appearance is the most important thing about you. You need one of your resources is moisturizer cream. But for other people, that's not really a resource. Like, they rarely put on moisturizer cream. But you can see that I apply a lot of moisturizer upon my skin because, well, you know, it is the done thing in the theater. Yes, quite. Anyways, not for me to sort of go off on some tangent about the theater or thespians in general. You know, I've had a passion for the arts ever since I was a small boy, and well, I think we would soon find ourselves here for hours if we were to breach upon that subject. Speak of the great bard. And my time with the company of actors and our escapades. Anyways, so resource is what resource is. You know, it depends on what you're trying to do. If you're in a World War I setting, you know, there are plenty of resources. You know, you got iron ore, you got coal, you got steel, you got infrastructure, railways. Okay, railways are a resource, and they need resources to be maintained. And another thing that they need to be maintained is people with knowledge of the interworkings of the railway system. And so that introduces the idea of intangible resource, human resource. Okay? You can't squeeze it out into your hand like a moisturizer. Okay? It's people and their skills that maintain the system of any kind, okay? But what you have to remember is that every mass phenomenon, okay, everything that goes under the umbrella term of the social sciences and infrastructure and, macroeconomics, okay, all of this stuff is essentially made possible by the historical trajectory that Europe goes into as World War I begins, because the war pressure combined with the fruition of the Industrial Revolution across the continent created such a pressure on technological innovation that it really sent mankind in a different trajectory than it had been going in before. And so you get the idea of a mass society and regular people, etc., which is now the dominating idea. And you also get the model of life, which is to serve the national industrial complex and reproduce. Okay? And that model of life has gone through many incarnations, often characterized as the white picket fence. Okay? You look at the United States. The United States suburban city is the reward for mass mobilization of people to participate in industrial warfare, which is highly technologized warfare with a high attrition rate on human lives, because bombs and guns are very much more effective than knives and swords. Not talk shit about knives and swords, but the technology is the essential factor, the defining factor of these recent conflicts. And these recent conflicts created the state as we know it, okay, as a all-pervasive entity that interferes in economic affairs, social affairs, obviously security affairs, but also value affairs. I mean, really every strata of life is now connected to the state structure somehow. And this really begins in World War One, because in order to demand the entire population to mobilize into industrial warfare, you have to provide them with a framework that makes it worthwhile for them. Because before World War One, most people were just living as farmers, more or less as they had been doing since the Middle Ages. Okay, there is historical continuity from the Middle Ages, right, from like year fucking 600 all the way up to 1914. But 1914 is when it goes off. That's when you get the idea of the suburbs. That's when you get consumer culture. That's when you get stock market speculation on a global scale. Okay? That's when you really start to see capitalism take off. And then in the late 70s with Nixon abolishing the gold standard, US having then created an international exchange rate system that tethers every currency to theirs, which means that when Nixon leaves the gold standard, he essentially turns dollars into gold. And then he goes and talks to the Chinese and creates that economic dynamic of outsourcing manufacturing and turning the first world into a primarily financial-based economy. That starts with that, because the US wouldn't have been able to readjust their economic model as fast if it wasn't for Chinese production capacity to maintain consumer demand, or to fill consumer demand, as the US and Western Europe pursued higher educated populations and more financial speculation, which is the legacy of the 80s. And this is because the US found itself being outcompeted industrially, first by its former enemies in the World War II, both Japan and Germany, who had of course been decimated after World War II. And so, the Americans had a few decades where they were ahead of them, in the 50s and 60s, and so forth. But by the 80s, Toyotas and BMWs and all that was really giving General Motors a run for its money. And then you have the tech industry and everything like this, and hedge funds, whatnot. You have the Norwegian State Retirement Fund, which is another hedge fund, essentially, massive hedge fund, huge hedge fund. So yeah. So resources. So what does this mean? What does this mean? Well, it means that, it means whatever you want it to mean, really. It means whatever you want it to mean. The important thing is that you remember that, this whole project was predicated on there being a war that is being fought. And I don't know if it was clear to people why they were fighting in 1914. But I know that, at least for some people, it was clear why they were fighting in 1939 and 1942. But I don't think anyone has a clear view on why we're fighting in 2022. I don't think anyone has a clear idea of that. And ever since I learned about World War I, I've always found it so surprising that there are people who who will be very who will take very lightly to supporting an actual war, even though they've gone to school and learned about, for instance, World War One, which was, a tragic event because, you had instances of incredible amounts of people being sacrificed for comparatively non-existent gains in terms of direct military strategy. So you have the idea of the locked Western Front. Now you might say, okay, but the Triple Entente won the war because they managed to maintain it for longer. They had a better combined industrial capacity. And it's like, yeah, but then you've kind of admitted that wars in the 20th and 21st century aren't about combat. They're just about starving other nations. And it's like, why? Why are you doing that? The standard of living that highly industrialized countries can provide is good, but it's not that good. And I'm not trying to be a dickhead here. I'm saying, like, the main thing that it provides is safety, right? It doesn't really matter how many inches you have on your TV at the end of the day. But, like, of course, in highly industrialized countries, you might have a bigger TV, okay? But the main thing is that it's safe. But, like, we're making the world unsafe by pursuing this weird shit. The world is being made unsafe through the pursuit of a continuation of this war, because the entire raison d'être of the state is to wage war. Okay? Now, back in the day, that wasn't that much of a problem because war was viewed as a kind of it was a kind of a sport that was fought between elites, and they would have their gangs, and they would represent for their constituencies, and so most people didn't have to deal with war. Like, even though wars were happening pretty frequently in the past, if you look at, like, the Middle Ages, it's very rare that you get mass mobilization. Okay? The Middle Ages, for all its cruelty, did have an aspect of, like, only the people who could afford a horse to ride on and a suit of armor actually went to war. And it's like, you can't think of anything more fair than that. Then you have peasant armies and stuff, right? I know that. By the end of the Middle Ages, at the start of the Renaissance, you saw this change happening. And that change was highly contributed to by the great religious wars in Germany in the 1600s, and how that became a proxy conflict between France and Sweden. And then later you have Prussia, and Prussia really creates the model for the modern perma-mobilized state, perma-mobilized war state. They create a benchmark for that. And that benchmark still lives on today, you know. They created mass schooling, for instance. And mass schooling is what we subscribe to today. And even back in the 60s and 70s, that made sense because the rationale was we need people to be better at maths in our country so we can make better nukes and tanks than the communists. But now that's not a reality. So why do we need people to be better at maths? So they can make the next pizza delivery app. Okay, but that's kind of like one man's job. Like, what do you do in mass educating everyone in mathematics? Like, there's enough people with natural intelligence in mathematics to keep innovation in the food delivery app section going. So it's like, why do we need to be mass educated in that? You know? Like, the arms race doesn't exist anymore. Like, whatever is left of the arms race is just a pyramid scheme. And like, people know that. Like, people say that openly. You know, they say we're just going to make as much money as we can and then get out when it collapses eventually. It's like, okay, seems legit then. Why would I want to put my trust into those people? Why would you? Why would you? So that's the thing. That's the thing. I'm sure there's more to add to the thing. That's why this is a video series. But how are we going to get some self-help out of this on the last couple of minutes here? Last couple of minutes. How are we going to get some self-help from this? Well, self-help. I guess you're fucked. I guess you should have thought of that before. But at least now you know. So now you know. And what is it that we know? Oh, yes, to the politicians. You can do one out of two things. Make up a new war for us to fight in, or demobilize. But don't stand in between, man. Don't sit on the fucking fence. And I'm waiting. Take a stance, okay? Because this is what this is. You either justify the mobilization economy by sending us off to die somewhere, so that we have a chance at social mobility as well, or you demobilize the whole thing and we go back to making a living the way we did in the feudal ages, essentially. But now we can use chainsaws instead of fucking hatchets. It's that fucking simple. And if you sit on the fence, you're just a profiteer. Go fuck yourself with a broomstick. Thank you guys for listening. Hope you had a good time. Leave a like, comment, subscribe. Put a comment in my pants. See if I care. And catch you in the next video. Bye.